That's right. Bear down, Bears fans. It's time for another edition of the Chicago Bears podcast, Bears Banter, powered by Second City Gridiron. Bill Zimmerman with you. And yes, we are back. The Chicago Bears this week are playing football that matters. The regular season is here. A wild off season that we have been talking about and discussing and arguing and debating since basically January 1st, since basically November of 2023. We have been talking about this off season and the direction that Ryan Poles and the Chicago Bears were going to head. And we are finally there. Finally, after, God, so many months of discussion. I am excited. We should all be excited. The Caleb Williams era is officially upon us as the Chicago Bears are set to kick off the season this Sunday against the Tennessee Titans. We are going to talk about that game and, more importantly, the season overall. We are doing our annual season preview with Aaron Leming, of course, Aaron of the Bear Report, and Windy City Gridiron as well. You can read him in both spots. Aaron's going to be by here in just a little bit to talk about everything going on with this team and talk about the entire season. And I'll tell you, of all the things I'm excited about, there's one little thing that I think I'm most excited about. And I actually discussed this with Aaron. I'm going to bring it up with him as well when he comes on. I am most excited about the difference a year makes. And forget the talent and all the improvements that this team has made over the last year. If you go back and listen to Aaron's and my podcast from a year ago, and again, Aaron does the September 1st, basically call it season preview with me right before week one every year. He has done it since, I would say, I don't have the specific year, but since John Fox was the head coach. I would say we started doing this in probably 2016 would be my guess. So we have been doing this a lot of years. So Aaron's great content. So I love getting him on. But a year ago, we both had the same vibe around this team that something was off. Something was missing. The amount of players that were injured, and it seemed they weren't really injured. They were just kind of hurt, but they weren't practicing. The team just felt unprepared at this point in the season. And we both talked about it, that we just didn't like how it felt going into week one last year. We just didn't like it. And of course, they get off to a horrible start that basically ended the season as it began. When you get buried to 0-3, 0-4 start, you just can't come back. And they did a heck of a job finishing 7-10. Let's be honest, you finished 7-6 after that woeful start. That's pretty damn good. But you cannot afford to have that kind of start again this season. And I don't think they will. This team feels so much more prepared for the regular season than it did last year. And I don't know if it's the fact that they're just blowing the doors off of teams in the preseason, not just winning games, but they're slaughtering everyone they play. Now, I understand it's preseason. I understand that's mostly backups that are doing that. And when, the starting offense was in there, it's not like they were racking up touchdowns on every drive, but just the mentality, the attitude, the intensity, it feels much better this year, Bears fans. I don't know how you feel, but I feel the vibe around this team is significantly improved. And I'm not just talking about that overall positivity that the Bears have been surfing and riding here since basically draft day, but I'm talking about how this team prepares on a day in, day out basis. It feels better, and it is important. It is damn important that they come out of the gate strong, because if they're going to compete for a playoff spot, they cannot afford to start off 1-3 or 2-4 or anything like that and try and battle back. They've got all those division games at the end of the year. What is it? 6 games in their last 7 are all divisional games. So, or 6 out of their last 8, whatever it is. They've got a lot of divisional games here to finish up the year. So with that in mind, they really need to get off. They don't have to get off to an amazing start. I keep hearing people, the Bears got to get off to a great start. They don't have to get off to a great start. What they need to do is not bury themselves. If the Bears are 3-3, that's more than acceptable. Of course, you'd love it if they started off the gate, 5-2 and they're firing on all cylinders. But as long as they don't bury themselves, that's all they need to do here early on. And I think Bears fans, look, we should be excited as a fan base. This team is headed in the right direction. They've got a great young quarterback. They have more talent around a quarterback than they've basically ever had. There's plenty of reasons to be positive, but let's keep in mind what positive means for this year. Positive does not necessarily mean winning a Super Bowl, going to the Super Bowl, going to the NFC Championship game. If they finish 9-8 and miss the playoffs, to me, that's a positive year. 9-8 and the 8th seed, and the ball doesn't bounce right in terms of tiebreakers, and they don't make the playoffs, and they go 9-8 with a rookie quarterback, and all signs, more money to spend, more draft picks, all signs pointing in the right direction. That's enough for me. That's enough positivity for me. Now, I am predicting, and I will, say so with Aaron as well, 10-7 is where I think this team's going to go. And I think this team will qualify for a wild card spot. I don't think they're going to win the division. I don't know if it's going to be Green Bay or Detroit. I suppose I'll get those predictions out before the start of the year here on Thursday. But I just don't see this team exploding like the 2017 team did, the 2018 team did. The 2018 team exploded because of the obscene amount of turnovers they forced on defense. And turnovers, as we have learned, are not sustainable. You can try and create turnovers, and it's just inconsistent with how many you create. So with that in mind, the defense, which could be better this year, may not be turning the ball over at the same rate they did at the tail end of last season. Just like 2018 to 2019, the Bears returned basically their entire defense, but they were not turning the ball over like they did in 2018, and we saw the team regress to being an 8-8 team. So for me, when I look at this offense is going to take a little time to develop. The defense should be strong from the jump and should be strong all season, but I don't think the Chicago Bears are going to be this shocking team that goes 13-4 and everyone's talking about it. I think the Bears are going to go where a lot of people are talking about them, winning 9-10 games and pushing for the playoffs. And with a rookie quarterback and the amount of change on the roster they've had and on the coaching staff, that's all I'm looking for this season. All I'm looking for. So I think I have my expectations set high. Some Bears fans, I think my expectations may be a little too low, but that's where I'm at. And again, we talk about, what's the most important thing in a season. And for the last couple of years, we kept saying Justin Fields. Well, it hasn't changed because it's still the quarterback position. The Chicago Bears need to know that Caleb Williams is the guy, and that Caleb Williams is going to be the guy for the next 10 to 15 years in a Chicago Bears uniform. Heck, if Caleb has his way, maybe in the next 20 to 25 years, if he really is serious about trying to chase Tom Brady and all those records. So, let's not worry about that for a while. Let's get a couple Super Bowls won and have Caleb locked down for a decade before we worry about just how many Super Bowls and how many years he's going to play here. So let's not put the cart in front of the horse. But if the Bears have a solid season, they win 9 games and miss the playoffs, and Caleb Williams throws for 4,000 yards and 25 touchdowns, are we really complaining? I certainly don't think so. So, and with that, let's talk a little bit about Caleb Williams. We've talked about him and talked about him and talked about him, and we'll talk about him more with Aaron here shortly. But this is a great time to be a Bears fan, and it's because of Caleb Williams. And I won't get into it too much. We know what this offseason was. We know how heated and how hostile this entire offseason was because of the Justin Fields versus Caleb Williams debate. And again, I've been trying to avoid Justin Fields talk about as much as I can during this offseason. And again, he's going to continue to come up because you need a comparison point. Who are you going to compare Caleb Williams to? You're going to compare him to Justin Fields, maybe Mitch Trubisky, maybe even Jay Cutler. But maybe you'll compare him a little bit to other NFL quarterbacks, but you need to compare him to other Bears quarterbacks because that's the resources we have here when we're covering this team. So we're going to see how Caleb Williams plays, and we're going to, here's the bottom line. And both of these quarterbacks, it was a little different. With Justin Fields, it was kind of more about trying to play on time. And with Mitch Trubisky, it was truly understanding what the defense was doing. They didn't have the exact same problems, but they had similar problems. And right now, And we talked to Dan Durkin about this a couple of weeks ago. You can check that out on the YouTube page, Second City Gridiron, or on the podcast channel if you are so inclined. Dan Durkin did a great job breaking down Caleb Williams' preseason debut against Buffalo. And he talked about how impressed he was with Caleb Williams running the offense. Not the off-schedule stuff, not the circus stuff that we know Caleb can do, but the on-time playing within the offense. That's really what Dan was impressed about. And that is something we just did not see Justin Fields do. And that is really why Justin Fields is on Pittsburgh. So if Caleb Williams does that, this offense is going to run the way Shane Waldron wants it to. And if Caleb can do that and then use the circus stuff when he needs to, they're still going to run the football and establish that running game. As long as Caleb Williams can execute the offense, this Bears offense is going to be pretty good. I don't think they're going to be top 3 or top 5 in the league. I think they could push for top 10. I think you're looking, if things go well this year, I think you're looking at a Chicago Bears defense that finishes in the top 10, pushes for the top 5. And we'll talk about the defense here in a little bit. That's going to come down to the defensive line. And an offense, best case scenario, finishes in the top 10. But if it finishes top 12, top 13 with a rookie quarterback, that's awesome. And I'll tell you what, if the Bears defense finishes 6th and the Bears offense finishes 12th, there is no way that team is not a playoff team. That team is going to be a team that is pushing for the division and making the playoffs and capable of winning a playoff game if they play that well during the regular season. And that's going to come down to Caleb Williams. And it really comes down to, how much have we learned since 2017 about developing quarterbacks as fans? We have seen the Chicago Bears continue to make errors. Maybe we didn't even realize they were errors at the time, but we have continued to see them make errors. And now it looks different, right? The only error they potentially made was keeping Matt Eberflus and not hiring an offensive-minded head coach. Ryan Poles adamant that Matt Eberflus is his guy. He's going with it. It is not impossible to marry a rookie quarterback with a defensive-minded head coach. We've seen it a few times before, but it is not as popular and traditionally not as successful as the rookie QB with the offensive-minded head coach. But Shane Waldron is here. Shane Waldron is a good offensive mind, and hopefully this support system on the coaching staff that they have put around Caleb Williams will help him tremendously and kind of be that support team that you need with Kerry Joseph and all the guys, Thomas Brown, that to support a quarterback where if the coach is defensive minded, there's enough good offensive coaches to keep a consistent offense, a consistent coaching staff around the quarterback as he develops. So I'm excited for Caleb Williams. I've been excited for Caleb Williams since October. You guys know this. When that started to become a reality, that it was at least possible that the Bears were probably looking, whether from their own, poor performances or Carolina's poor performances, that they were looking at a top 3 pick and they were going to be in the hunt for number 1. That Caleb Williams talk started then, and it was exciting then, as it should be. Now, before we switch over to the defense, I do want to mention Justin Fields here for just 1 minute, and then I do want to mention the offensive line. Justin Fields, and I said this in a tweet, Justin Fields is the backup quarterback to start the season, and as I said in the tweet, I think Bears fans should expect a 6th-round pick for Justin Fields. Furthermore, and this is why I say furthermore, to drive that point home, Russell Wilson was named a captain for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Do you think even if Russ is struggling after 2 or 3 games, they're going to bench the captain for Justin Fields? I think Mike Tomlin, he's very loyal. He told Russell Wilson he was going to come to Pittsburgh and be the starting quarterback. And I think barring an injury, that's going to continue to be the case. And we are going to see Russell Wilson start several games. And yeah, will Justin Fields get in some games here or there, some special packages? I would expect so. But I don't think they're even going to flirt with a QB change. Now, if they're winning football games, they're not going to flirt with it at all. If they are really struggling, I think it's going to be week 6, 7, 8 before they even consider it. So if Justin Fields doesn't get in till then, he is going to have to play well to keep the job and stay healthy, because he's not going to be able to afford an injury and miss a couple games late in the year if he's going to get to that 51% of the offensive snaps. I don't think he's going to get there. I think Russell will. He may get to 45% of the offensive snaps. I also think Pittsburgh is savvy enough to realize that if they bench Russell Wilson because he's not playing well, that means they're not making the playoffs. So they can easily manipulate Justin Fields' snap counts towards the end of the year, not being playoff contenders, and get that to be a 6th-round pick. What really needs to happen, in my opinion, for that to become a 4th-round pick is that that Russell Wilson probably needs to get hurt in the first 2 or 3 games. Justin Fields plays well enough to keep the Steelers in playoff contention so that when Russell Wilson comes back, they decide to ride the hot hand with Justin Fields. But I think Fields is their QB2. I think Fields is going to be used in special packages. And I think that's basically all Bears fans should expect. So if it ends up being a 4th-round pick, great. But that looks like a 6th-round pick to me. Now, before we finish up here, I do want to mention the offensive line. And I know a lot of Bears fans have been concerned about it. They have released their official depth chart. Coleman Shelton is officially the Bears starting center. Nate Davis is officially the Bears right guard. No surprise at the other 3 positions there. And Ryan Bates is actually listed as the backup left guard, not the backup right guard. Bill Murray is listed as the backup right guard. Insignificant. It really just doesn't matter if Nate Davis gets hurt. Exactly what they decide to do. But, when I look at this Bears offensive line, here's what I look at. I look at a starting unit that, if it stays healthy, is good enough. Not good, but good enough. And for the Chicago Bears second team on the offensive line, I actually think the second unit is outstanding. When you compare the Bears second unit to what other teams have, it's really solid. Now, I know a couple of them are banged up right now with like Larry Borum, but when you have Borum, and I know no one really knows what Amagaji is right now, but Karan Amagaji is the other tackle. When you have Matt Pryor, when you have Ryan Bates and Bill Murray, that is about as solid as a second unit as you're going to find. So when you have Nate Davis, who misses time, Braxton Jones, who has missed time, Tevin Jenkins, who, as we know, misses time, when you are in that situation and you have quality backups like Matt Pryor, like Bill Murray, like Ryan Bates, like if they had to go, let's say, the shit hits the fan and Braxton Jones, Nate Davis, and Tevin Jenkins are all injured. Now, we know when Tevin is out, how much it hurts the offensive line. But if you had to come across with Matt Pryor, Bill Murray, and Ryan Bates, along with Coleman Shelton and Darnell Wright, obviously that's not a great offensive line, but it's still serviceable. And it doesn't take that big of a drop compared to the starting unit. It really doesn't. I mean, Braxton Jones is better than Matt Pryor, but Matt Pryor is pretty solid as backups go. Ryan Bates and Nate Davis, honestly, it might be, a modicum of difference between the two of them, the way they're playing right now. Tevin Jenkins to like a Bill Murray, that would be a drop off. But Bill Murray, he's been around the league for a while. He's a solid football player. So that's the positive I see with this offensive line, is it should have the ability to withstand injuries, something they really haven't been able to do in years, something they weren't able to do with Ryan Pace and haven't been able to do the first couple of years of Ryan Poles. So offensive line wise, while I don't like what's at the top, I do like what's at the bottom. And that could significantly help the Bears this season when they do have a couple injury prone players on that offensive line. Now, before we get to Aaron, let's talk about this defense for a minute. We know how good the secondary is. The cornerbacks could make an argument for best in the league. Safeties are solid. I love this Jonathan Owens signing, and I have mentioned it a couple times before because I hated the safety depth that the Chicago Bears had last season. I hated the fact that Hicks or, whatever crap they had was, if anyone got hurt, if Eddie Jackson got hurt, what was being trotted out there. I don't like the fact that Hicks even made this team. I know his preseason was decent, But I love that Jonathan Owens is the third safety. I think he can back up either position, and I think he is going to be a nice addition. We've seen Brisker's already banged up. He was banged up last year. So the fact that Owens is here, I feel so much more comfortable at safety. You already have to feel great at corner. Josh Blackwell, very solid backup nickel. Terrell Smith, pretty darn good outside corner. Probably could start for 8 to 10 teams in the league. And yet he's the backup for the Bears. And Jalen Jones, anytime he gets opportunities, plays well. Gotta love the secondary. Linebackers, gotta love the linebackers. Now, I'm not a guy that wants to pay Tremaine Edmonds, but they paid Tremaine Edmonds. So the fact that Edmonds is here with TJ Edwards and with Jack Sanborn, that is a great top three. Amen's here more for special teams, not as much of a linebacker on the defense. Noah Sewell, again, has traits, hasn't played much, has been injured. I've seen some Bears fans on the timeline starting to freak out about Noah Sewell. Don't freak out about Noah Sewell. Even if Noah Sewell is a bust, he was a 4th, 5th round pick. Not a big deal there. No reason to panic. Not all those level draft picks are going to pan out anyway. So let's not worry about that. But the defensive line, they made a couple moves to help with the depth. And Darrell Taylor is a decent player. But this defensive line, to me, is still a concern. And I've heard some guys on the beat say that they like the starting 4. I don't like the starting 4. I'm okay with the starting 4. I don't think anybody should like the starting 4. If Gervon Dexter makes massive steps this year and becomes that true disruptive 3-tech, then maybe you can like the top 4. But for me right now, I look at this top 4. I still see it as a bottom third in the league top 4. And the fact that they have woeful depth behind them, I don't trust Zach Pickens. I said I like Taylor. Booker showing a little flashes here, but it's not like these players can step in and play 75% of the snaps and be solid players. Booker as an unknown, maybe, but I think he's got to get bulkier. I think he's got to do more in the run game. He's not there yet, but as a rotational pass rusher, I think Austin Booker can absolutely have a role. Hardy played great in the preseason, earned a spot. I know Dom Rob played well, but not interested in Dominique Robinson getting any significant snaps. That ship has sailed as far as I'm concerned. So again, I've been saying it this entire summer. I don't trust this defensive line. I have questions about it. But again, Ryan Poles can't fix everything in 2 off seasons, or 3 off seasons, I should say. But he's come pretty close. He's done a heck of a job building up this roster. And now he's going to have some high draft picks again next year, a 1st rounder, 2 second rounders right now, plus a good amount of money to spend again. They don't have that many extensions they can put out there to eat up cap space. Tevin Jenkins, maybe. But with that in mind, they should be able to sign another guy on this offensive line, bolster that some, sign another guy to the defensive line, bolster that some, and then spend high draft pick, 1st and a 2nd round pick on a defensive lineman and an offensive lineman. And then at that point, you can potentially add 4 starters to that group of 9. And suddenly with Montez Sweat, with Darnell Wright, some of those other guys, and again, maybe Dexter continues to develop, then you've got legitimate starters across the trenches. But they're not there yet. And that's okay. They can't fix everything in 3 seasons. This is a GM who ripped up the entire roster and started over. So with that in mind, we're going to get to Aaron Leming. I have babbled enough. The Chicago Bears, this first week 1 is just a few days away, and we are going to preview the season with Aaron Leming of Windy City Gridiron and the Bear Report. This is Bill Zimmerman, Bears Banter. We'll be right back. Welcome back into the podcast. Excited to keep this tradition going. This man comes on every year at the start of the football season. This podcast has been with Windy City Gridiron and Second City Gridiron for several years now. But even before that, with the other websites that house this podcast, Aaron Leming has come on. He's come on since, I believe, John Fox was the head coach of this team. So this is the 3rd head coach now we've been doing this with. He is Aaron Leming of Bear Report and, of course, Windy City Gridiron, at Aaron Leming with 1M NFL on Twitter/X. He joins me now. Aaron, Bill Zimmerman, how you doing?
Doing well, man. I am glad that we get to continue the tradition, and I think I don't know. I guess we'll see. I mean, obviously we're going to get into this, but for the first time in a while, I think there's actual like real optimism. So it should be a much more fun season to cover than it has been lately.
Yeah. I think everybody's excited. Everyone's looking forward to this. And you almost think there's almost too much hype. You almost get worried that there's too much hype right now. But before we get into kind of specific players and position groups and everything, I want to wind you back a year ago. Because when you were on this podcast, we both, for whatever the reason, how they looked in preseason, the injuries, kind of the way they were talking in press conferences, 1 year ago, in essence today, when we were doing this podcast, you and I both said, something doesn't feel right about this team. It feels flat. It just doesn't feel like they're going to be ready to play week one. We talked about it and we said, we hate doing this because everyone was hyped for Justin Fields and everything, but it was just like there was something off. And of course, they got off to a woefully terrible start last year, and any chance for the playoffs was basically eliminated by October 1st. This year, Aaron, and I know it's preseason, but they're blowing everybody out in preseason games. There's an entirely different vibe that they feel focused. The difference of just kind of the mindset and mentality of this team from last year to this year, to me, feels wildly different.
It does. And I think, this is year 3 of the rebuild. I mean, this is about the time where they should at least start being competitive and start competing for a playoff spot. Anytime you've got the number 1 overall pick at quarterback, I mean, and that's the thing is like, we can talk about Justin Fields. We can talk about Mitchell Trubisky. This is a very different situation, if not even just for the fact that they actually took the top quarterback at number 1 overall. And again, I know some people will point back to Trubisky, very different quarterback class, very different context overall. So I think when you couple that with the fact that they went out and they made some moves, going out and getting a guy like, DeAndre Swift early on in free agency, I'm still not super convinced as a motorcycle rides by there. I'm still not super convinced that was a smart move at $8 million a year. Then you go out and you get Keenan Allen, you draft Rome Odunze, and then all of a sudden you're looking at a defense that played at the top 5 level throughout the last half of last year. And then you're looking at an offense that all of a sudden has a lot of weapons. I mean, in terms of overall talent, especially offensively, I think you could make an argument that this is probably the best skill position group that we've seen in Chicago maybe ever. I mean, obviously it's all on paper at this point, but a lot of it feels different because of the way that they built the team. And then again, I mean, it's just this team has a different charisma, and it's kind of one of those. It really is. It's truly a put up a shut up type of season, especially for this coaching staff led by Matt Eberflus.
Yeah, and you brought up Matt Eberflus there, so let's talk about Matt Eberflus, because it's a fascinating offseason for Matt Eberflus. It really was, because after the Bears lost to the Packers to end the season last year, and I know the score was like 17-9, whatever it was, but they really got. They should have lost by 3 scores there. They did not play well. The Packers left points on the field. It wasn't anything the Bears did to prevent it. It was just a couple mistakes. I don't remember the exact details, but it was a bad game. And I would say 80 to 90% of the fan base wanted Matt Eberflus fired. I wanted him fired because I was expecting Caleb Williams to be there. I wanted the offensive-minded head coach, et cetera, et cetera. But that all aside, there's a lot of positives Matt Eberflus provides, and I think we can pretty comfortably say that Monday to Saturday, Matt Eberflus is a good head coach. He holds the players accountable, but the players still really like him. A lot of positives there. But Aaron, this haircut, this glow up that he's had has changed the mentality of the fan base about this head coach tremendously. Like, I've never seen anything like this. And I get everything's positive with Caleb Williams, Odunze, Allen, all these positive things going around with the team, and there's not any adversity for Eberflus to deal with right now. But like, this is still the same guy that made questionable decisions in the fourth quarter. Now, were those questionable decisions because he didn't trust Justin Fields, or because he's a conservative, defensive-minded head coach, and that's going to continue to be his mindset? So I'm curious where you are with Matt Eberflus as the Bears head coach, because while sure, there's plenty of positives about things he can do, defensive play calling. He did a great job with that last year. But at the same time, this is still the coach that, like I said, 90% of the fan base wanted fired after the Packers game on, the final game of the year.
Yeah, and I still think they would have been completely justified in doing so, and I still think they probably should have done that. But again, I mean, you kind of make these decisions and you kind of have to roll with it. And I wrote this back, at the beginning of the offseason, and talking about how Bears cannot continue to make the same mistakes in terms of quarterback development. And, obviously they haven't made the same mistakes when it comes to the offensive line, which I'm sure we'll get into. They surrounded them with good talent. They surrounded them with a proven offensive coordinator in Shane Waldron. But I think the biggest thing, and as you hear one of the dogs barking there, as you kind of think about it, one of the other big mistakes that they've made the last few years, especially with those two quarterbacks, has been firing the head coach after year one of the quarterback. And I think that that's what they have to avoid. So I think, they have committed to Eberflus, and this can't be a 1-year commitment at this point. They need to be able to rely on this coaching staff. And ultimately, here's what I think. I think, like you said, Monday through Saturday, Eberflus is fine. I think Sunday in game, I still have some concerns. I think at this point in time, you have to rely on the coaching staff around him, especially Eric Washington, the defensive coordinator, to kind of take on more than what they had in the past. And then obviously with Shane Waldron and that offensive coaching staff, I think the big thing here is, and I think this kind of goes with Ryan Poles as well. If Caleb Williams is the guy, like if he is a top 5 quarterback, that just masks so much. I mean, look at Buffalo. I mean, Sean McDermott is a solid head coach, but I don't know that anybody would look at him as a defensive mind and say, yeah, he's one of the best coaches in the NFL right now. Like, you can get away with a lot if you hire the right guys around you and you have the right quarterback. So I think that kind of has to be the mindset right now. Hopefully he learns from some of these in-game stuff. I really hope that they aren't as conservative as they show in the preseason at times. But it's just, unfortunately, this is kind of what you get with the defensive head coach. And there's a reason that the majority of the successful teams in the NFL in this day and age all have offensive-minded coaches.
Yeah. So let's talk about the quarterback situation, because, I mean, look, we've gotten pretty much 7 minutes into this. We still haven't talked extensively about Caleb Williams, which is some kind of record. But look, I mean, you brought up like the Trubisky thing about having the number 1 quarterback in a draft, and forget generational and forget all that stuff that was attached to Caleb Williams at some point or another during his collegiate career. The one difference for me, and I think it is a major difference, is the consensus number 1 overall pick is a quarterback. Forget generation. I think I'm talking about the one specific year. It's Caleb Williams, it's Joe Burrow, it's Jameis Winston. Like, I'm not saying they're all going to hit, but when you have that quarterback versus, I guess it's Mitch Trubisky, I guess it's Kenny Pickett, when you're in that mentality of, well, yeah, because quarterback's so important. If the best quarterback in a draft is not the slam dunk number 1 pick, there's a reason why there's an edge, a corner, a tackle, and in Kenny Pickett's case, he went 18-19 to the Steelers. Like, there was just no reason to even take a first-round quarterback. So I think there's a big difference, and I wrote some articles about it, when we were talking about the Bears drafting Caleb Williams and all. There is a big difference, before we get into Caleb's specifics, about drafting just the year's drafts consensus number 1 overall pick as a quarterback versus taking the number 1 quarterback in a draft that may not have a consensus number 1 QB.
Yeah, no, there absolutely is. And that's why, talking about it earlier, it's like there needs to be context behind it. Because, again, Trubisky was the top quarterback taken at number 2 overall. But and this is going to be, there's a lot of revisionist history going around with that quarterback class. But, I mean, that quarterback class was viewed with Patrick Mahomes, Deshaun Watson, DeShone Kizer, as a not a very good quarterback class. So, and I think that needs to be remembered the way that it actually truly was, because yes, Patrick Mahomes is the best quarterback on the planet right now. Patrick Mahomes is going to go down as one of the best quarterbacks of all time. But most people had Patrick Mahomes as a late first, early second round quarterback. And there were quite a few people surprised that he was taken as high as he was. So this is a very different situation. And it's not to say that is indicative of how Caleb Williams' career is going to play out or anything like that. Because, again, you have Trevor Lawrence at number 1 overall with Jacksonville a few years ago, when obviously Fields went in the same draft, that has been good but hasn't been to that level. So I think there's kind of a fine line balance there. I think that, when you're looking at the quarterbacks over the last, let's just say 15 or so years that have come out of the draft in terms of being that consensus guy, Obviously, Caleb Williams, Trevor Lawrence, I think to a certain extent Joe Burrow, but I think Joe Burrow was a little bit different just because he was such a relative unknown until that last year at LSU. And then you have to go all the way back to Andrew Luck in terms of looking at these quarterbacks that, even if you don't want to build them generational, these were guys that everybody that knew anything about college football knew about. Anybody that knew anything about the NFL in terms of the draft knew that these guys were going to be the top quarterbacks, the unquestioned quarterbacks, regardless of what anybody says about this class this year. Caleb Williams was always going to be the top quarterback taken. Like that was, I know that as we get further along into the draft stuff, as more people get the all 22 from college, there's stronger opinions, I guess you could say, of people saying, oh, well, Jaden Daniels is a top quarterback. Drake May was neck and neck with Caleb Williams for a while, and frankly, he was barely the number 3 overall pick. Caleb Williams was the guy, and that's not to say that he's going to be the best quarterback in this class. It's not to say that he's going to be a top 5 quarterback, but I do think when you're rolling the dice, when you're talking about taking a quarterback in the draft and developing a quarterback, these are the types of chances that you take that have a much higher hit rate than taking a Trubisky at number 2 when nobody was settled on any of these quarterbacks being, actual top 10 picks, or the fact that that any of these guys are going to be any good. So I just think from that perspective, it's very different when you're looking at these draft classes and how they're actually rated.
Yeah, and look, and here's the big thing, and we've talked about this, and we don't need to get into it too much because it's well in the past. But with Caleb Williams, the conversation about him not being the number 1 pick was because of basically a conjured up issue with Caleb Williams, because and now it's not just guys like you and me or even Dane Brugler saying these kind of things. You're hearing it directly from the Bears, players, staff members, head coach, GM, anyone who has access to the media, that Caleb Williams was always the most talented quarterback, but is he coachable? Will he be a problem in the locker room? Is he going to try and rip up the CBA? Is he going to want ownership? All these things that have been we're talking about for months, basically none of them were true. So when you talk about, some people thought Jaden Daniels should be number 1. Some people thought Drake May maybe should be number 1. You're also talking about guys that were comparing him to a Caleb Williams that wasn't the actual Caleb Williams. And even the Bears and some of the Bears players, Cole Kmet said, I thought maybe he was going to be a diva because of what I had heard about him. Well, who Caleb Williams is a guy who will talk to the media, who is a good teammate, a good guy in the locker room, a leader, like all the boxes that seems that you want to check for your quarterback. Caleb Williams checks those boxes. So the arguments that were being made were just literally fictional pieces of literature.
Well, and again, I probably have a more unique perspective than a lot of people when it comes to Caleb Williams, because again, I'm an Oklahoma fan, and I know anybody who's heard me talk on this or speak on this subject before knows this, and they're probably tired of hearing it, but it's like, Caleb Williams is somebody that was highly, highly touted coming out of Gonzaga. This was basically Lincoln Riley's crown jewel of actually recruiting a quarterback and developing him and all that stuff at Oklahoma, because all of the other quarterbacks that he developed at Oklahoma were all transfer portal guys, right? So, it's one of those things where being an Oklahoma fan and seeing how it all played out, especially with the COVID year, because he basically didn't have a senior year at high school. And then he comes in, obviously now there's a lot more out there in terms of his mindset. I mean, Spencer Rattler going into that season was looked at as the consensus QB1 of the next year's draft class. Everybody thought that he was going to be the guy, all that stuff. And then a few weeks into the season after the Texas game, all of a sudden Caleb Williams is coming in as a true freshman and not only starting, but playing at a pretty dang high level, especially considering how much was going wrong at Oklahoma with Lincoln Riley already having 1 foot out the door. And I say all this to say this, right? Because, Lincoln Riley leaving and going to USC was something that not many people at Oklahoma took well at all for a multitude of different reasons. One, it's Oklahoma. You never expect your coaches to leave for a different opportunity. 2, he was basically, handed it on a silver platter, one of the best programs in college football, from Bob Stoops and decided that he didn't want to go to the SEC, so he went ahead and went to USC, right? There was never any ill will when it came to Caleb Williams and him transferring. I think a lot of people expected that to be the case. Carl Williams, his dad, has had such a terrible reputation. It's this boogeyman mentality of who he is supposedly and who he's really not. I mean, he's a dad that cares a lot, but he's not somebody who's been this guy that's this ultimately this kingpin that's pushing for all this stuff and is going to change the NFL and is telling his son to do this, telling his son. He wants what's best for his son, and ultimately the Williams family felt that what's best for Caleb Williams was following Lincoln Riley, who had heavily recruited him, who they committed to being his head coach and basically getting him to the NFL level. They followed him to USC. And I say all this because, even the way that Caleb Williams handled leaving Oklahoma, right? So Lincoln Riley walks out the door. They go into the bowl game. Caleb Williams plays in the bowl game and then basically says, I'm going to take some time. I'm going to figure things out. I'm going to go in the transfer portal. It doesn't mean I'm not coming back to Oklahoma, but I need to do what's best for me. And obviously, ultimately, he ended up going to USC. But again, I have quite a few people that I talk to that cover Oklahoma. There has never been a negative thing said about him during his time at Oklahoma, during the way that he handled Lincoln Riley leaving and how he handled the transfer portal situation, any of that. There's never been a negative thing that I've ever heard said about him. So I always had that perspective of, he's not who they say he is. And he didn't have, and that's the thing, is he didn't have that aura. He didn't have that label about him until he goes to quote unquote Hollywood and turns into the Heisman winning quarterback. And then you see him, crying on the sideline or crying in the stands with his mom, and all this stuff goes wild. When in all reality, this last USC team in 2023 was far and away the worst team that Lincoln Riley has ever fielded, especially on the offensive side of the ball. I mean, you look at the skill position players weren't there after losing Jordan Addison. You look at the offensive line. The offensive line was absolutely awful. They didn't have Bill Biedenbaugh there to be able to develop guys. I mean, Caleb Williams had so little around him, and frankly, Lincoln Riley is starting to kind of show that he's not the coach that a lot of people think he is. There were a lot of stuff that went wrong last year, and a lot of that was not on Caleb Williams. So I know that's kind of a long way of talking about this, but again, having the perspective of him coming from Gonzaga High School to Oklahoma, to winning the job, to handling things the right way and playing in the bowl game, taking his time to make the right decision, transferring for the right reasons, not just leaving to leave. Caleb Williams has always been, obviously, he wants to make sure that he is successful and he is set up the right way. But at the same time, he's very conscious of who he is and the decisions that he makes and the impacts that he makes on people. So I don't know. I never understood it all. I think there were a lot of weird stuff going on, but I think that it's all been clarified now. And again, obviously, if he starts to lose games, we'll see what actually happens. But I mean, I think that he is perfectly set up to be, the quarterback in Chicago for quite a while.
Yeah, absolutely. And Kate, well, let's talk about Caleb on the field here before we get to some other positions and issues surrounding the team. So let's just kind of talk generally about his performances in the preseason. Any practice highlights you may have seen, hard knock stuff. What any pieces of information that you've collected over the last 6 weeks here on Caleb's training camp and preseason performances. Because look, I'm excited, and what I've seen in the preseason games confirm that for me. But at the same time, Mitch Trubisky completed like his first 9-10 passes in his first preseason game. Justin Fields had some electric plays in preseason. So we've seen previous quarterbacks, rookie quarterbacks play well. One big difference, I think, and I understand it's preseason, one big difference is those guys weren't the consensus number one quarterback on the team. So Mitch Trubisky's coming in after Mike Glennon, Justin Fields coming in after Andy Dalton. So you're getting a little bit of a different perspective at who he's playing with and who he's playing against, more importantly. But, obviously we saw some of the incredible plays with Caleb Williams, the off the script stuff, the little dump off to DeAndre Swift, the incredible off balance throw to Rome Odunze, the Cole Kmet needle. We've seen some of the plays, but we've also seen him, work pretty well in structure as well. So where are you with what you've seen from Caleb Williams on the field?
Well, yeah, I think that obviously it was a relatively small sample size, and what he did in that first game definitely gave people a much bigger warm and fuzzy than what he did the majority of the second game against Cincinnati. But I think that, again, you go back and you talk about what Trubisky did and what Fields did, and then compare that to what Caleb Williams did. And I think that you kind of have to dive a little bit deeper into the process of being a rookie quarterback and the process of how that's going to translate to the NFL level. And it's like with Trubisky, going back, and again, this isn't revisionist history. Like when you go back and you look, a lot of those were designed rollouts, cutting off half the field, basically putting him in the best position to succeed based on what he did in college. And then kind of the same thing with Fields, where there wasn't a lot of structure going on. And I think when you look at what Caleb Williams has been able to do in the preseason, he's shown the impressive arm talent. He's shown the impressive ability to create something out of nothing and all of the improvisation that he's able to do. But at the same time, like you said, he's able to play in structure. I think what's really impressed me overall has been, and you're just going to have to, the dogs are just going wild.
It's usually my dogs that are barking.
Exactly. Yeah, they're playing nonstop here. But the biggest thing to me is it's the advancement in terms of, his pocket presence, his pocket awareness, his spatial awareness, being able to stick in the pocket, go through his reads, and make a decision and make the right decision. And I don't think we saw a lot of that. And again, that's not really a knock. I mean, most rookie quarterbacks, and we've kind of seen that with Bo Nix. Like everybody here in Denver is going crazy about Bo Nix. And it's like the reality of it is like if you really go back and you watch Bo Nix, yes, there's been some impressive plays, but he's not playing in structure, for one. He's not getting through his reads properly, and his footwork is a mess. And I think when you go back and you look at even the guy like Jaden Daniels, when you're comparing him to Caleb Williams, there are a lot of similarities in the fact that they're standing in the pocket, they're doing what they need to do, they have good pocket awareness, they're breaking the pocket when they need to, but there's also, from a mechanical and a process standpoint, they look advanced. And I think that's the big thing with Caleb Williams right now. He looks advanced. He doesn't look like a rookie quarterback. There are going to be rookie quarterback moments, but he looks like a quarterback who is emulating Aaron Rodgers, who's advanced, who's prepared. And again, that's not to say that he's not going to have bad moments, but I think overall, just seeing the level of quarterback play from a rookie that we've seen with Williams has been a lot higher than what we've seen in the past with Trubisky and Fields.
Yeah, I completely agree. So let's talk a little bit about who Caleb Williams is going to be throwing the football to, and we'll kind of lump receivers and tight ends together. And I'm going to kind of go a little backwards in this because I want to ask you, we're pretty fresh off the 53-man roster decisions, and there's not too much to get into, so I didn't want to lead with it or anything. I would have kept Reddy Stewart if I was putting together the 53, but he did safely make it back to the practice squad. But the other player I would have kept is Brendan Bates, because I thought he had earned himself a spot, and he gets swooped up and picked up by the Jets. That's unfortunate, but look, is it probably going to be the end of the world? No. But at the same time, that was a decision that I thought was questionable, and it did hurt a little bit there. So, what was your thoughts here? We'll use this as a leapfrog into the 53. Any other decisions on the 53 you thought of that were maybe questionable or something you wouldn't have done? And, Brendan Bates, I'm pretty sure you had him on your 53 as well. Kind of your thoughts on losing him?
Yeah, Brendan Bates was the one guy that I'm like, man, because here's the thing. And again, I'm not saying that he's going to become Sam Laporta or anything like that, right? But I think that having a guy like, the skill set of, let's just say, Mercedes Lewis from 6 years ago helps a lot, because he was known as a blocking tight end coming out of Kentucky. And then we saw he's actually pretty dang athletic, and he's a pretty good pass catcher. And I think that that's the type of guy that you keep on your roster and you let him develop. Even if he doesn't do anything this year, you take the chance of, keeping him on the roster, saving him, bringing him back next year, and maybe instead of spending, $2.5 million a year on Mercedes Lewis, you're able to just have the guy that is basically on the cheapest deal possible. So Is it a huge loss? No, I don't think any of the cuts that they made were huge losses. I was kind of there with you on Stewart, but at the same time, I also kind of understood that it's like, man, they had defensive back as a whole. They had quite a few names where it's like they could have easily have made 53-man rosters, and it wouldn't have shocked me at all. So I totally understand that part of it. I think nothing really surprised me. I don't really understand keeping Kari Blasingame. That didn't really make a ton of sense to me. But I think it was kind of how they structured the roster in some areas. Like they kept basically, not only did they keep 6 defensive ends, but they also have a 7th on IR to return with Jacob Martin. And I mean, like, again, I get they're kind of sorting through everything, but if you look at the defense and the rotations, I mean, they're basically going to rotate 4, maybe 5 defensive ends, but usually 4 defensive ends. So, I mean, you're talking about having 2 guys that are going to be inactive every week. And maybe that changes a little bit just based on the fact that, you know, the special teams rules are a little bit different. You're going to want different skill sets in there, whatever the case may be. But I think when you go back and you look, it's like they technically kept 5 receivers. I know they listed Bayless Jones as a receiver, but he hasn't been playing receiver. They kept 5 receivers and technically 5 running backs, because they had, I guess, 6 running backs.
6 if you count Blasingame, yeah.
Exactly. So it's like you start looking at some of that. I thought was kind of interesting. The other one that I thought was interesting, and I don't know if this was like a Brett Rippon decision, I thought keeping Rippon on the practice squad made more sense than Austin Reed. I mean, you just have a really, really young quarterback room. But again,
you realize Austin Reed's the oldest quarterback on the roster?
I think I did know that. Yeah, because I think
it's crazy.
Did he mention something about that on, well, obviously outside of Rippon, but didn't he mention being like the oldest rookie on Hard Knocks?
Yeah, but that might have come up. But yeah, with Rippon gone, he is literally the oldest quarterback on the roster.
Yeah. So it's, again, I think this roster is a lot deeper as a whole, but there are certain things that I would have done differently, but nothing where I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe they did that. The other one that I'm a little surprised about was them actually keeping Larry Borum. I figured with him making $3.2 million, I figured that would have been the way that they would have either put him on IR, reached a settlement, whatever the case may be. But very clearly they wanted to keep him around if they use one of their 2 pre-53-man roster, return designations on him. So.
Yeah, so let's get into the top part of the receiving room, because I think there's plenty of reason for optimism and excitement. And to me, what works the best about this, in terms of when you're talking about setting up quarterbacks for success, and we know Shane Waldron can develop quarterbacks, and we've talked about the concerns with Matt Eberflus there as the head coach. But the one thing that they've done that I absolutely love is when you talk about the length of Caleb Williams' rookie deal, and we'll call it 5 years with the option. DJ Moore will be here unless he gets injured and they decide to move on. DJ Moore will be here for the entirety now of his rookie contract. Rome Odunze will be here for the entirety of the rookie contract. And Cole Kmet's here for 4 years of that rookie contract. So you have 3 legitimate targets, and obviously Keenan Allen this year, and who knows where the future holds for him. But you've got 3 legitimate targets already that Caleb Williams knows every year of his rookie contract, he's going to have these 3 guys available to him to throw footballs to him. So I think what Ryan Poles has done in terms of building up the position groups, and you talked about it, arguably, the best skill position group in team history. And the only comparison is the first year with Trestman, those Trestman teams with Cutler, Forte, Martellus Bennett, Jeffrey, and Brandon Marshall. That is the only comparison as far as I can make to skill position players. And I think I would take this one. You may take Brandon Marshall over DJ Moore or whatever, but a 3rd receiver in Rome Odunze, that team did. I think Earl Bennett was the 3rd receiver. Those guys aren't really comparable. So when you look at the skill position group, I like Gerald Everett. I know some people don't think he's going to have much of a role this year, but I think having him available is excellent. This group of players that Caleb Williams is going to have, not just for this year, but moving forward, puts him in a great position to succeed.
Yeah, and I think that's I don't know why these dogs have just decided. I think that's, again, kind of going back to, the article that I'd written back in, I want to say it was either January or February, in terms of not making the same mistakes. You're really safeguarding yourself from making one of those same mistakes in terms of having Justin Fields, in year one or year two with Darnell Mooney as your top option, and then, convincing yourself that Byron Pringle and Velus Jones Jr. are going to be good enough to be, those other receivers, or even going back to Trubisky's rookie year when Cam Meredith was his top option before he just completely ruined his knee and ultimately his career, and they were rolling with God even knows, I can't even remember. I try to block that out of my mind, right? So that's huge. I mean, that's absolutely huge because, again, especially in this day and age with running back, like you can figure out ways to make running back work, right? But with receiver, with tight end, because, I mean, even with Gerald Everett, I mean, you've got him for 2 years if you need him. Finding that move tight end is going to be a little bit easier with Cole Kmet in the mix. But, yeah, I mean, they've got some good depth. Obviously, we'll have to see what happens with Keenan Allen. I personally would be pretty surprised at this point if he's back in 2025. But even if you made that move solely based on saying, like, we want Caleb Williams to have the best possible receiving targets that you can have in a rookie year, that is so much better than anything that we've seen Bears rookie quarterbacks have in the past. So, I mean, I don't know how you couldn't be excited and couldn't be impressed with how Ryan Poles has learned from past regimes' mistakes.
Yeah. Now let's talk about Velus Jones, and we'll kind of talk about special teams here as we kind of transition over to the running back room, because look, and you talked about how many running backs they have here, but like Travis Homer and even Roshan Johnson, I mean, those guys are key special teamers. And when you're putting up the 53-man roster, Travis Homer may get 12 offensive snaps for the entire year. It depends on what Waldron wants, but he's here for special teams. So when you look at these rooms and, like you said, different skill sets with these new kickoff rule, which, look, we haven't seen much of interest to me in the preseason with it. It's been pretty straightforward. You see, you obviously learning the rules, but you see a play, and it's like, we're looking at the numbers now, small sample sizes, but the average starting field position is the 29. So are they going to sit there? If that continues, are the teams going to switch to it and go, well, I don't want to risk a touchdown, so I'm just going to start blasting it in the end zone. They can have it at the 30, or are they going to move that maybe back to the 35 to try and keep that punishment there? So I think the kickoff rule is going in the right direction, but I do think it still needs to be tweaked. But again, when we're talking about a guy like Velus Jones, and I know they've on the depth chart, DeAndre Carter is listed as the second kick returner. I've said this since early July when I had Robert Schmitz on here for our training camp preview. I think Khalil Herbert should be the second kick returner back there. I think his skill set makes the most sense. But with Velus Jones, the switch to running back, maybe you get better use of his speed and what he can do with the ball in his hands. I know a lot of Bears fans were upset that Velus Jones made the roster yet again. But at the same time, I'm going to sit here and say, with the new kickoff rule, with him trying running back, with the natural skills he possesses, I'm okay, on this flyer with Velus Jones for one more year to see if they can find a better role for him.
So I get the frustration or whatever, the disappointment of Velus Jones Jr., right? I mean, he was a third-round pick. It is what it is. But I think when you really look at it from a perspective of your last skill position guy, whether that's running back, tight end, receiver, whatever the case may be, you can do a lot, and I mean a lot worse than having Velus Jones Jr. as that guy, especially when he provides the value that he does as a kick returner. And I think the other thing I would say to all this with the special team stuff, I think a lot of teams, especially in the preseason, didn't reveal much of anything. I think that there's going to be, even with the Bears, I think there's going to be a lot of different things that they try to do, different things that, will be, I guess, creative or different, and it's going to be a lot of trial and error. So I think it's going to be interesting. But I mean, at this point in time, I mean, who else were you going to keep on the roster? I mean, Ian Wheeler got hurt and obviously tore his ACL. He's out for the year. Colin Johnson had that one big game and then basically didn't play for, the rest of preseason.
And he's 27.
Yeah. And Simba Webster, again, he's on IR. So it's like, if you're really looking at it from that perspective, I mean, as much as I like Brendan Bates, I don't think that I would have kept Brendan Bates over Velus Jones Jr., considering the value of what both of those guys bring. And again, that's just keeping the mindset of, if it's your last skill position player on the roster, which is exactly how you can look at Velus Jones Jr., in that context, I mean, he brings you a lot of value, especially if you're talking positional value, positional versatility, and then the fact that he can return, he should be returning kicks, and he can return punts if they trust him enough to do so. So I mean, speed kills. They talked about it a lot, and this is kind of something that the Bears have been trying to move forward. So I get it. I mean, obviously, if we get into the season and we're a few weeks into the season and he's costing the team wins or he's costing the team turnovers, okay, maybe you make a move at that point in time. But I think for the time being, you didn't have any better options. So why not keep him there and see if you can make something work? Again, just throw the draft position out the window. It doesn't really matter at this point. Like if you're just looking at him from a pure talent level and what he can do in terms of skill, I think he still makes sense.
Yeah, no, he absolutely makes sense. And let's talk about the offensive line. If you have anything you want to add about running backs, you can, but we already talked about Swift and Herbert a little and Roschon, and we'll kind of see what that rotation, ends up being. Obviously, Swift's going to get the bulk of the snaps there, but I think the offensive line's more intriguing. Obviously, Nate Davis was frustrating a lot of fans and coaches. They made it clear during training camp.
And their general manager that called him out again when he talked this last week.
Yep, absolutely. So we'll see. I think Nate Davis is here for this year. I would be shocked unless he wildly turns it around that Nate Davis is here next year. Ryan Bates banged up a little bit right now. So, Coleman Shelton looks like he's settling in as the top center spot. But, we'll talk about the second unit here in a second question. But this first unit, like, it's okay. They've got some talent. It should be enough to keep Caleb Williams to be able to play in structure, but he's going to get chased a little bit here with this offensive line. Darnell Wright, bad training camp, but, much better here the last couple weeks. I really like the second unit, and we'll talk about it here in a second. You brought up Borum already. But this first unit is, like I said, I think it's just okay. And like guys like Wright can improve. Tevin Jenkins, we'll see if he's around another year. But and that's the one thing that's kind of been my theme on this offensive line is while Poles has put together a decent one, he's put together one where you're not like, if you sit there and say, all right, who's going to be on the Bears 2026 offensive line? Obviously you got Darnell right there, but a lot of these other guys may not even be here by then. So it's kind of an interesting offensive line when you think about how it's constructed.
Yeah, well, and I think you can almost kind of make that same argument for the defensive side as well, and I'm sure we'll get into it. I think if there's been one complaint that I've had about Ryan Poles so far, it's been how he's dealt with the trenches. And I get it. Like it's a lot harder to build out high value areas, and he's done a really good job with receiver. Hopefully he's done a good job with quarterback. But I think when you're looking at the offensive line, there's more questions than you would like, right? And I think it just sometimes it's something as simple as like, why not try to attack center head on? Like why not try to do more than what they've done instead of bringing in a guy like Coleman Shelton, which, hey, there's nothing wrong with that. And then, Ryan Bates. But again, like all this talk about Ryan Bates, and Ryan Bates has barely played center in his career. Like this isn't a guy that's like a true center, right? This is not that type of situation. So I don't know. It's tough, especially when you're looking at the interior. I think Braxton Jones will be more than fine at left tackle. I think he's basically the new version of Charles Leno Jr., right? I think if they can get that type of production out of him this year, and I wouldn't mind them extending him. I mean, obviously on a reasonable deal. You don't want to pay him $25-30 million a year like some of these tackles have been getting. Obviously, Darnell Wright's got to take the next step. It was a little concerning early on in camp. It sounds like he's been playing better as of late, which is good. And then obviously the interior line's really the big thing. I mean, when you're looking at Nate Davis has been called out by multiple coaches and now the general manager. There's just a lot of there's a lot of questions on the interior offensive line. Hold on just a second.
As Aaron deals with his domestic.
Okay, there we go. I'm sorry. Yeah. So, and I think obviously, the other question that is just nonstop playing. The other question there is, where does Tevin Jenkins fit into this outside of this year? Can he stay healthy? I think if he stays healthy, I think you're going to kind of see a similar timeline to, the Jalen Johnson stuff where, again, Jalen Johnson had issues staying healthy. And it's like we knew the talent level was there. He put it all together in a contract year. They finally rewarded him for it. They've got the franchise tag. They can use that on Tevin Jenkins next year if they want. But again, he's got to stay healthy. And I think that's kind of the big concern on the interior offensive line right now. Even when you're talking about a guy like Ryan Bates, it's like none of these guys have stayed healthy. Coleman Shelton has been, like Ryan Poles called him the rock of the offensive line the other day, or the rock of the interior offensive line. And it's like, I mean, this is a guy that was brought in on a 1 year, $2 million deal or $3 million deal or whatever.
Yeah, they brought him in as expected him to be the backup center. That was the original plan. So.
And now he's your rock in the middle. Like that concerns me a little bit. But I think that at least in the preseason, what we saw, I think Shane Waldron is going to be able to scheme around that a little bit more. So I think that's kind of the plus there.
Yeah. So while we talk about the questions on the starting unit, and there's plenty, but I look at this second unit, Aaron, and that's where I feel a lot more comfortable about this offensive line, because the amount of times that someone would get hurt, and look, Tevin Jenkins, Nate Davis, we know these guys, even Braxton Jones has missed games. So these guys are going to miss games at some point. So then you go, well, who's coming in? And a second unit of, I know we haven't seen anything out of Amagaji, but he's a 3rd round pick. Second unit left to right of Amagaji, Bill Murray, Ryan Bates, Matt Pryor, and Larry Borum. That is about as good of a second unit as I think you'll be able to find in the entire league. So while the offensive line, the first unit definitely has questions, at least I think as Bears fans, we should all feel pretty comfortable that when one of these starters gets hurt, whether it's Murray, whether it's Pryor, whether even Borum is, I have my issues with Borum, but they didn't really seem to play anyone else. He didn't really seem to have competition at swing tackle. Pryor and those other versatile guys were playing a lot more interior. So I look at this second unit and feel pretty damn good about where it is in terms of when those guys are going to have to step up and play.
Yeah, and I agree. I think the only thing that you may, like, if you're being like really greedy here, the only thing that you may want more of is just maybe more upside, like developmental upside. But again, I mean, at this point in time, I mean, you've at least got that in Quran, right? So you've at least got that one guy where you're like, maybe we can pull a Packers like move and actually develop guys on the bench and then have them come in and step in and hit the ground running. But I think in terms of like proven depth, yeah, I think that they're in a really good spot right now in terms of where they're at, because whether it's Ryan Bates, whether it's Coleman Shelton, or whether it's Nate Davis, one of those guys is going to be on the bench, and I can tell you right now, one of those guys is going to be playing. I mean, if you're going based off of history, whoever the swing interior offensive lineman is, I mean, he's going to be playing, I would guess, a good 6, 7, 8, maybe even 9 games. I mean, there's going to be a lot of opportunity there. And then you got a guy like Matt Pryor, who, in my opinion, looked pretty good at right guard in that first game when Caleb Williams actually, had his preseason debut. So, yeah, I think that, again, sometimes it's not just about the level of talent in terms of starters, right? Like when you go back and you look at the Bears back in 2018 when they went to the playoffs, one of the main reasons why they were able to sustain wins throughout the season was they had injuries, but they had depth that they were able to rely on. And I think that's something that the Bears have sorely missed, and where a lot of teams sorely miss, and where they kind of fade later on in the season when these injuries come in. And I think when you look at the Bears roster as a whole, depth is in a lot better position outside of just, obviously upgrading the starting talent as well.
All right. Now we've spent almost 45 minutes here on the offense. Let's switch over to defense and special teams. There's not nearly as much to discuss about it. I don't mind that we've been offensive heavy, because that's, I think, where the most intriguing conversation points are. But let me ask you, we'll do special teams quickly, because I think special teams, really the conversation is Torrey Taylor. Obviously, Patrick Scales is hurt. We'll see how the long snapping situation is for the first half of the season without him. Scales is a reliable long snapper. Santos is, I think, he's fine as a kicker. He's not going to be confused with Justin Tucker, but he'll make more than he misses, and that's all that matters. But the punting situation is, obviously, it's intriguing. It's exciting. It's weird to say you're excited about a punter, but watching Trenton Gill, and look, he's fine. There was nothing, he's not impressive. He's below average as punters go. But I even thought it was funny because, he's on the Broncos, or he was on the Broncos in the preseason, and NFL's Twitter account put out, hey, here's a punter highlight. And it was Trenton Gill hitting a 73-yard punt, which is great. But it ended up in the end zone, and it's only a 53-yard net. And I thought that was kind of funny, because that was the thing with Gill, is seemed like anytime they had an opportunity to really pin a team back, it either ended up as a touchback or Gill kind of short-legged it, and it ended up in like the 15-yard line. And not that the 15's bad, but it's a lot different than the 4. And I've said this since they drafted Tory Taylor. If you've ever played organized football and you've played offense, when you get in your own opposing huddle, or your own huddle, I should say, and you're in your own end zone, just sitting there in the end zone, and you see how far you have to go, it's intimidating. I've brought up the fact that I've talked to members of the Steelers Super Bowl team that beat the Cardinals, and they had that great final drive, 98 yards, whatever it was, and obviously the touchdown to Santonio Holmes. They weren't even trying to score. They wanted to get a first down so they could punt and not give Kurt Warner the ball at midfield. They wanted one first down, and then they make a couple plays and they end up winning. Like, that's the mindset you get when you're on your own 5 versus on your own 18. So, and Ryan Post has talked about making other teams uncomfortable. I think the Tory Taylor as a 4th round pick, I know some people are like, you can't take a punter in the 4th round. I do think there's going to be a lot of positives here, and he's going to make an impact that a lot of 4th round picks don't.
Yeah, well, and I mean, we've heard nothing but just really good things so far about Taylor. We've seen, some pretty impressive kicks. And again, like, it's one thing to have a strong leg, right? It's another to be able to actually control what you're doing with the ball. And that's kind of been the, what Tory Taylor has been billed as. So yeah, I mean, I think that if he can consistently pin teams back, like when he needs to, like, let's say, if they're punting from their own 30 and he's able to, pin teams back, inside the 20 with a strong leg, that's great. But then those drives that stall out at, the 45 on each side or the 50, right around midfield. And if he's able to pin teams back, right around the, 6, 7, even inside the 5-yard line, especially with how opportunistic the Bears defense is, I think that's a huge, huge, huge value. And again, I mean, you need, like, you go back and you look at some of the best Bears teams in the last 20 plus years, it's been with Lovie Smith and Dave Tobe as the special teams coordinator. And special teams has always played a huge role in how successful Bears teams can be. And I think that it could be the same exact thing. And kind of going back to the Velus Jones Jr. thing, like, if he can be a really good kick returner, that's a huge value to the Bears, especially with this new kickoff rule.
Yep, absolutely. So, all right, I got 3 more questions for you. First one, we're going to switch to the defense. We're going to talk about the back 7. I think we can lump it in all together because I think the back 7 is outstanding. Obviously, I think safety's strong, and I love Jonathan Owens bringing him in because I hated the depth at safety. And I know that your starting safeties usually play 100% of the snaps, but if someone got hurt, they just didn't have anyone who could come in reliably and do it. Obviously, the top 3 corners are outstanding, but the depth there is also outstanding. You talked about it earlier, guys like Jones and Stroman or Blackwell, and these guys, they're all really solid football players. Terrell Smith, and the linebacking group, with Sanborn as your 3rd linebacker and having the versatility, he can play, all 3 linebacker positions, Tremaine Edmonds in coverage. I don't like Edmonds' contract, but, I'm going to work on getting over that this year. TJ Edwards, like, this back 7, I mean, I can't sit there and say definitively where they rank, but again, leaving the defensive line out of it, this back 7 is amongst the best in the league as far as I'm concerned.
No, absolutely. I think you say that about safety in terms of, like, they're usually playing 100% of the snaps. But I mean, when was the last time that the Bears had their safeties play even, 90% of the snaps? I mean, Eddie Jackson's been hurt. Jaquan Brisker's been banged up. Like, they needed depth, and they go from having very questionable depth to some of the best depth in the league. And again, we're not just talking like, the 2 starters there. Corner, I can't even think of a better group that they've had probably in my lifetime in terms of actual, obviously, there's some talent that needs to prove themselves, but in terms of overall depth, overall upside, I think you're good there. And then linebacker, yeah, I think the only thing that I'm a little curious to kind of see that's been, I guess you could classify it as a disappointment, what is going on with Noah Sewell? It's like he can't stay healthy, and when he's on the field, this was a guy that a lot of people were talking was going to be like a 1st or 2nd round pick a few years ago at Oregon, and then all of a sudden it's like, I mean, you could have made a pretty strong argument that he could have been left off the 53-man roster, and I don't think many people would have blinked outside of his draft status.
Yeah, I think honestly, if Mike Baskerville was a better special teams player, that very well could have happened. So next question, let me ask you about the defensive line, because I think I still have a lot of questions up front here. Andrew Billings is very good at what he does, but he's not he's not going to be, disrupting the pocket constantly on passing downs. DeMarcus Walker has some versatility. I think Dexter's going to be better this year, but I have questions if Dexter's going to be as good as they need him to be. I don't have concerns about Montez Sweat. We'll see about, Darrell Taylor and how he can do. For me, this is the biggest question mark on the entire team, is this defensive line. I think Ryan Poles knows it too. That's why he was trying to get Matthew Judon, still settled on getting someone like Taylor. This is, if the Bears aren't as good as people think they are, sure, Caleb Williams play is whatever going to impact, but it's going to be this defensive line, because if this defensive line is really bad, the secondary, as good as it is, isn't going to be able to cover for 6-7 seconds constantly. I have a lot of concerns here. I know some Bears fans are feeling better about it, but until I see it consistently, Dominique Robinson, I don't care what people say about the preseason. I don't even think he should be on the roster anymore. I have a lot of questions about this defensive line.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you. So here's what I will say. I like defensive end better than I did last year. Obviously they gave Yannick Ngakoue $10.5 million right at the beginning of training camp. That was a move in desperation if I've ever seen one, but it was needed. This year, they've at least got some options. The Taylor move will be interesting, but at this point, you gave up a 6th-round pick for him. You're not really expecting much. The interior defensive line is where I'm like, man, I wasn't a big fan of Justin Jones, but at the same time, you had to do something to replace him, and they didn't do anything. So I don't know, man. There's some questions there where I feel like they're one injury away, or a Gervon Dexter away, a Gervon Dexter not developing into what a lot of people think he's going to be, away from them having some serious issues on the defensive line and being forced into having to make a big move at the deadline again, where it may end up costing them more than a 2nd-round pick this time. So I'm hoping it'll all work out. Luckily, they got a lot of talent elsewhere. But again, the trenches as a whole on this team are the one area where, if the Bears don't make the playoffs, or if they don't have a winning record outside of the coaching staff, the trenches is where I would point back to, is they weren't strong enough. And that's where you really got to focus next offseason.
Yeah, and I think regardless of what happens with the trenches this offseason, I do think that's going to be the focal point. They'll have money to spend again. You can definitely sign a defensive lineman and an offensive lineman starting caliber there. And obviously at present, 3 top 60 picks. I think you're going to see a lot of interior picks with that as well. So last question for you. Always got to do a little prediction here to finish a season preview. So how do you feel the Bears are going to do overall? Where do you think they're going to finish this year? And then we, of course, have to ask, and how do you think this Titans game plays out?
Yeah. Well, so here's what I'll say. I've got the Bears at 10-7 this year. Maybe I'm a little too optimistic. Obviously, the rookie quarterback factor could go one way or the other. I've got them finishing at 10-6 in 3rd place, tied with the Lions at 10-7, with them being the 7th seed wild card. I think overall, this is a team, they need to have a winning record. There's no, in my opinion, and again, maybe my expectations are a little too high. They should be a playoff team this year, at least competing for a playoff spot. It's time, and if they don't, then there needs to be some serious talks of why they're not progressing in the way that they should. As far as the Titan game goes, in the beginning, I kind of thought, I'm like, man, this should be a pretty easy game for the Bears. There's never an easy game in general, especially week 1. I do think it's going to be closer, but again, this is a game that the Bears should win. The Titans are probably a better team than they're given credit for. They've got some pretty good offensive weapons. They've completely remade their defense. We've seen some of the moves that they've been making with Justin Simmons, some of the other free agent moves that they've made recently. But this is still a team that the Bears should beat. If the Bears are going to be a playoff team or competing for a playoff spot, they should probably beat a team that's going to finish right around 6 or 7 wins. So I'm going to say the Bears will win. I'll just say 24-17 Bears.
Yeah, I think the Bears are going to win as well. And I'm exactly with you. I've been sticking with 10-7 for a while. And yeah, 7 seed could finish 8th, depending on how everything else kind of goes. We can just kind of see where it goes. But regardless, meaningful football in December. So I think that's going to be exciting. And as for this Titans game, and I'll talk about it more to wrap up my podcast. But I think this is one. I'm going to say the offense isn't as good as people are hoping for, just because, kind of preseason rust, whatever. But I think they're going to win because I think the defense is going to have an outstanding game. So I think it might be a little more low scoring than that, but I think we both agree a win column for the Bears. So there he is, Aaron Leming at Aaron Leming NFL. And of course, Bear Report, read him at Windy City Gridiron. Aaron, thanks for so much time. Great conversation. And we'll keep the tradition going again next year.
Absolutely, man. Thanks again for having me on. Always enjoy it.
All right, there he is, Aaron Leming. I love that spot every year with Aaron. He does such a good job. He brings so much content. He knows the sport and the team so well. He's always great to have on. And the other thing, look, you always like when people kind of verify your opinions. And Aaron and I see eye to eye on Bears issues all the time. Like I still remember he and I, the first few years of Ryan Pace's tenure, did not see eye to eye on Ryan Pace's free agent process. I was okay with it. He hated it. And we would argue on Twitter nonstop. So it's just kind of funny as the years have passed, how much the two of us more agree than disagree about where the Chicago Bears are, and most importantly, where they are headed. Now, of course, if you had this opportunity to watch this on YouTube, we're going to get to the mailbag and we're going to get to a Titans prediction here in a minute. But I just wanted to say, plan this season for Bears Banter, slight change. As you know, we always try to put the guests on video, so those can be uploaded to the Second City Gridiron YouTube page. I'm going to try and have the full podcast. We might put it up in chunks. It might be the non-guest portion and the guest portion. It may be the monologue and the guest, and then the final segment might have all three of them up there, but we want to put all of it up on the YouTube page this year. Last year was the first time we introduced YouTube to the Bears Banter podcast. Want to stay relevant, want to stay up with everything. YouTube continues to be the way that people want to consume media. So we're going to put this podcast more on YouTube. Obviously, it will still be on wherever you get your podcasts. If you like listening to podcasts, it's still going to be there, but we are going to add the video element. So for those of you watching me babble into the microphone here on Second City Gridiron YouTube's page, thank you for joining me here. I will continue to try and be here for all segments of every podcast this entire football season. We'll see how this goes. But again, wanted to make sure we had more YouTube content for you from the Bears Banter podcast. So we'll finish with the prediction. Let's get to the mailbag first here, and let's look at what we've got here. Let's start with Club Bears Dubs. If this team starts slow out of the gate, like 1-4 or 0-3, will Flus be on the hot seat? Poles has essentially tied his wagon to Flus. Would Poles be on there with him if he is? All right. Here's what I would say about the Matt Eberflus on the hot seat situation. And this is coming from someone who wanted Matt Eberflus fired at the end of the season. But again, because Matt Eberflus was not fired and he is here, I am a Matt Eberflus fan. I would like to see him here for the next 10 years because that means the Bears are being successful and Caleb Williams is the guy. So that being said, here's my thoughts on the Bears philosophy, Ryan Poles and Kevin Warren with Matt Eberflus. It would take a pretty epic failure for Matt Eberflus to be fired this season, in my opinion. I don't really think Matt Eberflus is really on the hot seat this year. I think Ryan Poles, the way he has approached this quarterback situation and how to develop the quarterback, I think he knows how to screw up a quarterback. And firing a coach after a rookie season is a hell of a way to screw up a rookie quarterback. That this team has to regress, has to win 5 games for Matt Eberflus to get fired, in my opinion. If this team goes 7-10 or 8-9, I think Matt Eberflus returns next year. So when you talk about the Bears starting off 0-2 or 1-3 or something out of the gate, Is Matt Eberflus on the hot seat? No, I don't think he is. Like, if you're talking about Matt Eberflus getting fired in season, I mean, they had an opportunity to get rid of this guy in the offseason. Then they're going to fire him and what? Promote Shane Waldron, the head coach? I can't see it. Cannot see it at all. I think Matt Eberflus is very safe this year. I think if there's regression, we're going to talk about firing him at the end of the season. But even if it's just stale and they go 7-10, I think it's more probable than not that he returns. And if they win 8 or 9 games, he's 100% back. So I do not really think Matt Eberflus is on the hot seat. I don't know what the Bears have done in terms of his contract, in terms of have they finagled with it at all to line him up more with Ryan Poles or to line him up more with Caleb Williams. Haven't heard anything about that. I know the Bears had secretly extended, Ryan Pace in the past or whatever to line him up with Matt Nagy. I don't know if they would do that, but again, traditionally, after this season would be when you'd want to extend your head coach. So that puts you in a situation like if Matt Eberflus goes 10-7 this year and the Bears look good, make the playoffs, yeah, they're going to give him a contract extension. If the Bears go 8-9, now you've got Matt Eberflus entering his final season of his contract. That gets things a little weird. So I don't know exactly how the Bears are going to handle it, but I think they will give Matt Eberflus every benefit of the doubt. And I think most likely Matt Eberflus will be back in 2025. All right, Chris Armstrong. Let's say we're 4-2 at the bye. Does Daddy Poles get serious about bringing in a dominant edge? And do the Bears let's try this again. Do the Bears have the cash to do it? I would say the Bears can make the cash work because, one, they did do an extension with DJ Moore that did free up a little space here. They don't have a ton of in-season money, but keep in mind, if the Bears are going to trade for an edge that's making significant cash, you've only got to pay for about half the season. So, I mean, even if you bring in an edge making $17, $18, $20 million a year, you only need $8 to $10 million to get him there across the finish line. So I think they can absolutely make that work if they need to, if they want to. Will Poles go and spend another second-round pick at the trade deadline? He's done it 2 years in a row with Chase Claypool and Montez Sweat. Is he going to do it again? He might if the right player is available. I think that's the one thing we've learned about Poles. Poles likes a guy, he goes for a guy. He won't overspend on a guy. He's got ceilings as to what he thinks they are worth in terms of their contracts, and he does not spend more than that. That's how he's missed on some guys in free agency that luckily he did have those ceilings. Mike McGlinchey, the holdup there is the Broncos were willing to give him more guaranteed money than the Bears were. Ryan Poles would not come up on the guaranteed money. Mike McGlinchey signs with Denver. Thank goodness Ryan Poles didn't do that because he stinks. He is bad in Denver. That would have been a terrible signing because also keep in mind he's a right tackle. They wouldn't have drafted Darnell Wright. So that would have been a mess. So sometimes you give a GM credit for the moves he doesn't make and not just the moves he does make. So Ryan Poles, it would have to be the right guy. Could he go back to Washington and forget dominant edge? Could he go to Washington and be like, Jonathan Allen, you guys are doing all this, you're changing things up. Let's take another one of your defensive linemen. Here's the second-round pick for Jonathan Allen. Could I see him do that? Yeah, I could see him do that. Then suddenly you got Jonathan Allen, you got Dexter, you got Billings. That defensive tackle rotation looks really good all of a sudden. And then you could spend a first-round pick on an edge in April of 2025, and then you've really got something humming on the defense line. Just think about that for a second. Let's talk about having Montez Sweat and a first-round edge starting next year with Jonathan Allen, and maybe you let Dexter start as the one tech. He should be able to do that. Or maybe you have Billings start, and Dexter is your key rotational defensive tackle at both positions. And then behind your first-round edge and Sweat, you've then got Austin Booker rotating and DeMarcus Walker rotating behind those guys. Suddenly your defensive line kicks ass with Jonathan Allen and a first-round edge. So if the right guy is available and can be had for that second-round pick, I would think Poles would really want to hold on to that Panthers one and get rid of his own second round pick if he could. If that player becomes available, then yes, I think Ryan Poles could make a move. He has shown us who he is with making those moves at the tail end of the trade deadline. Excuse me. He's shown that he's willing to do it. So there's no reason to think he won't do it, especially now that this team is closer. All right, Pete Martinac. Fields averaged just 24 pass attempts per game in his 3 years in Chicago. How many do you see a Williams getting per game as a rookie, and particularly in his first game? Well, I would say, Pete, if you're looking this from betting purposes, bet the under on pass attempts for Caleb Williams in his first game. I think the Bears are going to try and establish, not put too much pressure on him, try and establish the run game, let the defense do its thing. So I wouldn't expect big things from Caleb Williams. I'm not, we'll talk about it here when I get to the prediction. I'm not expecting a gigantic game from Caleb Williams in his first game. I just expect a solid game, and that's fine. But for a season, here's the thing about Fields and his 24 pass attempts. Justin Fields took a lot of sacks. Justin Fields also did a lot of scrambling when the offensive play broke down because he was holding onto the football too long. He wasn't making anticipatory throws. We know all the reasons why. Justin Fields, if he was performing better within the body of the offense and getting the ball out quicker, would probably have been averaging about 30 pass attempts a game, but he wasn't. He was there at 24. So, for me, I think Shane Waldron's going to have a pretty close to a 50-50 split. I think you're going to be looking at 65 to 70 plays a game. So I think the Bears are going to be looking at 32 to 35 pass plays per game. Got to figure Williams is going to scramble on a couple of them. He is going to get sacked a couple times. So I think 30, 31 pass attempts a game is probably a pretty comfortable spot as to where Caleb Williams will be as a rookie. All right, Esteban. Yeah, my question is, since when did Matt Eberflus call plays for Fields in the fourth quarter? And how are the conservative choices of Eberflus, i.e. play calls, that Eberflus chose on Fields amateur hour? All right, so, excuse me. I think Esteban, if I'm reading this question right, is saying, because I have said many times that Matt Eberflus, that a lot of guys around the Bears think that Matt Eberflus was the reason why some of those play calls were weird and that Justin Fields wasn't getting opportunities because Matt Eberflus was worried that Justin Fields was basically going to screw up in the fourth quarter. So if that's what Esteban there is referencing, I'm not sure why this is amateur hour. This to me feels like we're clinging to Justin Fields still, Esteban. I'm going to be honest. Maybe I'm misreading the question, but to me, Justin Fields had an opportunity last year, and I know Fields fans are upset about this. He did not take full advantage of the opportunity. He just didn't. He got injured, missed 4 games. That hurt him significantly. And you said, oh, well, he got hurt. Well, he's gotten hurt all 3 seasons because he holds onto the ball too long, and he takes a lot of hits, and he gets sacked all the time. That's part of the evaluation, that Justin Fields can't stay healthy for 17 games because of the amount of hits he takes, because he holds onto the football too long. It's all connected. So Justin Fields may not have gotten enough opportunities to grip it and rip it in the fourth quarter because Matt Eberflus was concerned he was going to make mistakes, because those mistakes had been there, not just that season, but previous seasons. And Matt Eberflus had seen it for 2 years and wasn't comfortable giving him the ball. Now, again, if that's the case, I don't know if 100% that's the case. We'll see more this year, but I would not call it amateur hour at all. I would call it an evaluation of Justin Fields where they gave Justin Fields enough to make a true evaluation for him in 2023. DJ Moore is awesome. Cole Kmet is solid. The offensive line was fine. It wasn't amazing, but we all liked what we saw from Tevin Jenkins. We all liked what we saw from Darnell Wright. Braxton Jones had a pretty good second half. I know Nate Davis wasn't great. I know the center wasn't great, but you can't have this. This comes back to the Mitch Trubisky arguments. You can't have everything perfect. That was the Trubisky truthers. That was the thing. Well, If Matt Nagy called better plays, if the wide receivers caught more balls, if the offensive line blocked better, if this happened, if that happened, and that happened, then Mitch Trubisky would be a Pro Bowler. Yeah, because that's not how the NFL works. You can't, if you can drop guys in perfect situations, then Mason Rudolph might be able to win you a Super Bowl. But there are no perfect situations. Your quarterback has to overcome those situations. And Mitch Trubisky couldn't, and that's why he's gone. And Justin Fields, the way he overcame those situations is he played backyard football. He ran, he threw deep balls. Sometimes he hit them, sometimes he didn't, but he couldn't play in the structure of an offense. And that is why Justin Fields isn't here. So enough with this. The Bears did screw him. In 2021 and 2022, the Bears screwed Justin Fields. And maybe if they had a better situation then, he would have developed differently. But we can only look at what's in front of us. And the Justin Fields in 2023, whether that's just who he is or because of the Bears screwing him up the previous first two seasons, Justin Fields in 2023 did not earn the starting spot in 2024, especially when someone like Caleb Williams was sitting there. If the Bears had the 9th and the 13th pick, would there maybe have been a different situation? Very possibly. But that didn't happen. They had the number 1 pick. They had the opportunity to take Caleb Williams, and they did. All right. Let's do one more question here before we wrap up. Kind of a lengthy podcast, but hey, Aaron was great, so we had a nice lengthy chat with him. And hey, first game of the season, so plenty to get to. But we're going to wrap up the mailbag with Cav Manning. Give me a reason the Bears can't win it all. I look at this team and it seems stacked. It's a matter of just needing one more monster on the D-line and maybe 2 more for the O-line. Everywhere else seems good enough to compete and beat anyone in the league. Cav, look, I love your optimism. I'm optimistic about this team, but I'm going to give you wanted one reason. That's all you want. Give me one reason the Bears can't win it all. Here's an easy one. In the history of the Super Bowl, 57 of them, however many there's been, how many rookie quarterbacks have won a Super Bowl? That answer is 0. Not 1, not 2, 0. A rookie quarterback has never won the Super Bowl. I think Ben Roethlisberger won it in his second year. Kurt Warner, it was his first year starting, but he had been in the league a few years. But true rookies, not a one has won the Super Bowl. That is enough of a reason. Rookies eventually will make mistakes and they will cost you, especially against good teams. It's very hard to do. So you wanted a reason? There's your reason. And I love Caleb Williams. I think Caleb Williams could be special, but that is still asking a lot. I mean, Dan Marino came into this league better than any quarterback ever for like his first 3 years. He made it to a Super Bowl in year 2, still couldn't win it. So, all right, let's move to the prediction here. Tennessee Titans, bad season last year. They've made some improvements here. They brought in some more receivers, the running backs, tried to bolster the offensive line, brought in a couple players on the defense. The talent on this team is better, but it's still not a good football team. Maybe the Titans are a 7-win football team if things go right this year. That's the way I see it, especially in a tough AFC. Not that the South is impossible, but the AFC overall is obviously a very challenging conference. So when I look at this Titans team, I look at it and go, if the Chicago Bears are going to make the step that everyone wants them to make this year, at home, you beat the Tennessee Titans. Plain and simple. This is a game the Chicago Bears have to win. If they lose it, is it the end of the world? No, it's week 1. They got plenty of football in front of them. But this is a game the Chicago Bears should win. Now, rookie quarterback, first game against the NFL. I think Caleb's going to make a couple flashy plays. We'll be excited, but I think the Bears are going to be mostly conservative here in week 1. They're going to try and run the football and try and establish that short game, run game as much as they can, and they're going to want to let the defense eat. They don't know what Will Levis is at quarterback. I'm going to assume they think if they can pressure him and rattle him a little bit with the coverage that secondary is going to have, that they can give Will Levis a long day as quarterback. And I think that's a very distinct possibility. I'm not the biggest believer in Will Levis, so I think that absolutely could happen. Now, if the defense plays well, and I expect them to, the offense shouldn't have to do too much to win this football game. So I think the Bears are going to get a few Cairo Santos field goals. I do think the Bears are going to find the end zone. I think Caleb Williams will be involved in that, whether it's just a running touchdown to DeAndre Swift or someone, but Caleb Williams makes the big pass play to set him up at 1st and goal. I do think he's going to have, it's not just going to be one of those drives where it's 12 plays, 75 yards, and they ran the ball 10 times, and Caleb Williams went 1 for 2 for 7 yards on the drive. I don't think that's going to be their scoring drive. I think Caleb's going to flash a little on that drive, but I think overall, because usually defenses are ahead of offenses, week 1, rookie quarterback. Rookie quarterbacks don't win their first starts in the NFL very often. I think Caleb Williams does win his first start in the NFL. Let's start with stats. I think Caleb Williams throws for right around 200 yards. Let's call it 191. I'll say he throws a touchdown pass, and I'll say he throws 1 interception. 191 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 interception. Bears fans will talk about how they are not impressed, how he's a bust, and they'll be all disappointed because he didn't have 350 yards and 3 touchdowns in his first start. I'm not worried about it because I think the Chicago Bears win. I think the Bears defense bottles up that Titans offense, and they don't do too much. And I think the Chicago Bears win this game, and I think they win kind of an ugly, low-scoring affair. I think it's going to be something like 19-13 Chicago Bears. 4 Cairo Santos field goals, 1 Chicago Bears touchdown. 19-13, the Chicago Bears will defeat the Tennessee Titans. All right, that's going to do it for Bears Banter. We are back in it weekly. We'll be publishing Wednesday mornings most week. And again, we'll, wherever you get your podcasts, you can get us, the Second City Gridiron podcast channel, and you can get more Bears Banter content this year on the Second City Gridiron YouTube page. Bear down, everybody. We'll talk to you next week. Adios.